Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this video, you have what might be my last Goodreads Choice Awards themed vlog. The winners are going to be announced on Thursday, and I obviously will probably mention that a little bit here, but I'm going to film a separate video for that, so I probably won't update on Thursday at all. I wasn't going to update today, but I have a really long run tomorrow. It's not my long run, that's 21 miles. Marathon training for you. But I won't have time to update that at all. And I was thinking that I was going to be doing my reaction video because all of the others have been, the other two have been on Tuesdays. No, it's on Thursday. So all that aside, I'm opening up this reading vlog, trying to get through some more books. I discovered this morning, with just a little bit more to read of A Day of Fallen Night, that the audiobook is 38 hours all long because it includes an hour 10-minute interview with another author who I've forgotten the name of. Not Tasha Suri. Samantha Shannon. I just got a book by Tasha Suri, that's why her name's on my list. Anyway, so the actual reading of the audiobook is only 37 hours. Anyway, so I have finished this behemoth, and what did I think? This thing is not only massive in length, it is massive in scope. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it. This is the kind of story where all of these storylines are super compelling and intriguing, and for the most part, they don't actually overlap. So I don't know why they couldn't have been split into two different books. And I think that would have served the narrative and the plot and the pacing a whole lot better. I think it was the pacing that held me back. Or maybe the fact that, yeah, because we had so much in here, each of the parts of the plot was just so long. So probably a 4-star read, but again, I just finished it this morning, have not put it through Compile. I have not read any more of Foxglove since I closed out last week's vlog, so I'm not going to update on that. Audiobook wise, that's the one I'm reading physically, is an ebook. But audiobook wise, the next one that I picked up is Page Boy by Elliot Page. I will probably be finishing this tonight, and I wondered on the memoir list if I was going to come across any of the memoirs that are not really told chronologically. This one is one of those. This one is one of those memoirs that is frustrating for me, who is a very linear, chronologically minded person, because Elliot Page skips around on a whole bunch of stuff. It's not even generally by topic, although occasionally he will have a topic and he'll talk through something and through a period of time and a progression of something, but then the next thing he's off to something else. And they're all related. So it's like, you know, the train of thought idea, and you follow that train of thought and you end up completely somewhere different. And with memoirs, that's not necessarily my favorite style, and with memoirs, that's not really my favorite style. It's a bit off-putting. And also, this was a little bit with the Pamela Anderson book as well. There's a lot more talk about sexual matters. I figured that would be in here because a lot of what Elliot Page had to deal with his coming out when he was still Ellen Page, and then his transition. But there's a lot more than that as well, different descriptions. Just for me personally, I just don't like it. It just doesn't sit well in my brain. And for that reason, I'm definitely not getting as much out of this as a lot of the other ones, even the Love Pamela one, the Pamela Anderson one. And I think I've heard other people talk about the chaotic nature of the flow of this book when they've talked about their reviews as well. So I don't think that this one is going to win. I don't even actually think that it's going to be in the top 3. It's going to be, I think, in the top 5, but I don't think it's going to be much higher than that. As far as what I'm going to pick up next, I have another audiobook. I think it's one that's not in the top 10. I think it's the Minka Kelly memoir. And so I'm going to pick that one up next after I finish this one. And I'll probably be starting that one tonight. As far as what I pick up physically, I just realized I just filmed an unboxing and I unboxed one of the boxes, but not the other two. So I'm gonna have to do those. Anyway, physically, I probably will pick up A Curse for True Love because I have been eagerly anticipating that one. But that's after I finish Foxglove. It's probably gonna be another couple days. Okay, it's been a while since a wrap up. Tuesday was a full day and I didn't really have time to record a clip then. Wednesday, I was just overall tired. I had a really massive speed work session on Tuesday that was really long. It was 10 miles and my body was just tired. And then I was recording my Goodreads reaction in the evening, so I didn't record an update then. So I have quite a few books to update on, and I just remembered I need to go grab one more book. Okay, I had been keeping a stack of books that I needed to update on, and I had this brick in here, but I'm pretty sure I already summarized my feelings on this. If I haven't, oops, I'm not gonna try to drudge back up for that one. The next thing that I read on audiobook is Page Boy. Yeah, now I'm pretty certain that I had already because I listened to both of these as audiobooks, and I remember for sure talking about the first half of this one. In the end, the same things hold true. It was not written in a way that my brain can really process, that my brain really enjoys. I can process it, but it doesn't enjoy it. A lot of this was sexually heavy, and I just don't like that kind of writing. I know that there are people who do. I personally don't need that described to me, and there were times where it just took me way out of the book, and some of the times it just didn't need to be described that explicitly. Maybe the incident should have been mentioned and talked about, but some of the descriptions of it were unnecessary. So ultimately, this is, if I rated memoirs, would be the lowest rated one. It did not work for me, and I'm sad to say that because I love this genre. I love hearing about other people's stories, and I hate it when I don't have a hit. The next thing that I read on audiobook, and yes, I've read several on audiobook, all of them actually are audiobook, and I just remember the one that I read physically was on ebook, so I need to talk about that, is Minka Kelly's Tell Me Everything. This is one of the memoirs that I had left to read that did not make the top 10. Obviously by this point winners have been announced. I reacted to it, that video is already up. This one didn't make it, and it was pretty far down, and I kind of wonder why. It's interesting, a lot of what's known, at least what I know, what's portrayed in the media about Minka Kelly seems very similar to the character that she portrayed on Friday Night Lights. And that background is very different than her actual life. And there was a lot that she went through and talked about in here. She was very open and raw and emotional and discussed some pretty hard things. And she also talked about the fact that she's really processing it, and there are flaws in her, a lot of which were created as responses to her trauma that have caused her to really mess up her relationships and are not healthy in general. And that sort of vulnerability is really incredible to see because a lot of people don't necessarily talk about things that they know that they did wrong. So I really enjoyed this one. I wish it had been higher up. I kind of understand why she's not quite as prominent, although I don't watch Euphoria. I don't have cable. She's been on that. But Friday Night Lights was a while ago at this point. Okay, so the latest one that I finished via audiobook is Inkblood Sister Scribe by Emma Turge. I am so glad that I listened to it as audiobook because now I know how to pronounce her last name. It is Hungarian in origin, and I knew that there would be a different spelling of it based on the umlaut over the O's. So I really enjoyed this one. I was nervous about it, but this is one of the best standalone fantasy novels that I've read. And you think about the fact that Samantha Shannon says that this is a standalone. 900 pages, tells so much in the story. This also is a standalone, but it's only like 400 pages. Yeah, just over 400 pages. She does such a good job in developing the world as it exists because you have to establish it. There's a whole lot of world building and lore to get into, and there's rapid moving plot, not too fast, but there's still a lot going on in there, and there's 3 different perspectives, and she balanced that all in 400 pages. And I thought she did a really good job. I did not expect the 3rd perspective. This is sold as a story of 2 sisters. And yes, it's the story of 2 sisters, but there's also a 3rd perspective that is incredibly important to the plot and various discoveries. I will say there was one point where some of the backstory is explained towards the reveal at the end that just felt like an info dump. And I understand it, and I think that's probably part of maybe the constraints that she gave herself on page numbers, and that wasn't necessarily discovered organically. That's like the one little flaw that I have about this book, but I think it was really well done, and it definitely deserved its second place standing. Yes, second place in the debut category. So before I get to my current read, I will mention what I read physically was Foxglove, and I, at the time of the last update, or initial update, opening update, had read about 150 pages or so. I hadn't really read anything physically, even though it's on ebook, Tuesday or Wednesday. It had just been audiobooks. And so I finished it, no, just Tuesday. Anyway, I finished it on Wednesday, so yesterday, and I just read up until the Goodreads winners were rolled out, because they've been pushing them out around 9 p.m. the day before, and I enjoyed it. At first, it was a little bit difficult getting into the story. Yes, I was a little slightly put off with the basically immortal love interest, not immortal love interest who's only about 20. That's just a personal hang up. I'm not necessarily a fan of that. And what I thought was going to be the case was not actually the case. There was another twist at the end, towards the end of the book, that you go, oh, and you see all of the plot points, all of the clues that Adeline Grace has been laying along the way for it. I think that she did a good job I think that she definitely served her book well by adding in the second perspective of Signa's cousin, Blythe, who for most of the first book was on her deathbed, and that was a catalyst of a lot of the information and events happening in that first one. I would say that the one detractor for this one is that the plot did not seem as focused on some sort of conflict or event. It was a lot of character building and intrigue building, all of the filler around it that you need for a solid novel. That was mostly what this book was, and it wasn't necessarily one driving plot or thing that she had to figure out. Yes, there was the accusation against her uncle of murder, and a lot of her actions she's taking to try to free him. But that, for a lot of the time, was in the background, even though it was referred to a lot in the foreground. So I don't think it's going to be super highly rated, but I'm definitely going to finish this series when the 3rd book comes out, I think next year. And then the book that I started and am about 40% through today, I started it barely last night and then read a lot today, is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez. I will say, at this point, I am not as hooked and captivated by the story as Together We Burn, which is the first book that I read from her. I am really intrigued. I wonder if part of my hesitation comes from the way that the audiobook narrator is voicing the character and everything in the book itself. Yes, this is categorized as young adult, but the character herself, I believe, is 19. So it's on that borderline there. The way that the audiobook narrator is reading it, she sounds very young. I don't know how to describe the voice that the narrator is giving. I don't know how to describe the voice that the narrator is giving as anything other than very young and a lot more childish than the character seems to be. And when you listen to an audiobook, the voice brings a lot to it. And I'm not saying that she's doing a bad job. I just don't know if I'm jiving with that interpretation. I love her accent. I love the way that she has that Spanish tilt accent to the word. All the words are, I don't know enough about Spanish accents to say whether or not it's Argentinian or not, but I really, really enjoy the accent as it is. So the story itself seems pretty straightforward. And I wonder if another part of my hesitation is the fact that it's not really completely in a fantasy world like Together We Burn is, where it's rooted in things that we know, but different. And I don't know if that's the case or not. We shall see. I'm only like 40% into the book. I'm liking it. I'm just not hooked into it yet. As far as what I'm going to read next physically, I went to Costco today. I had to pick a couple things up, and as has become my new habit, and that sticker's annoying. As has become my new habit though, I perused the book section. And of course I had the holiday edition of Iron Flame and the regular edition, and don't get me started on that. But they had The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, and I've been trying to get a hold of this, and I thought, you know what? I think it's worth it. I want to read it, and I think this is going to be one that I want to own, so I purchased it. So this might be what I read next physically. Okay, so I have just filmed one clip and one video, which is why I'm in this position. This is yet again another one of the reasons why I moved away from vlogging into recent reads, because I don't think I have the energy or the brain power or the will to film each day, especially when I'm reading as many as I am. Less than November, but not that many less. So again, it is 2 days after the previous clip, which was on Wednesday. So I'm coming to you on Saturday. I have finished, well, I haven't quite finished one of these. So I have finished 2 full books since that last point, and I have not picked up a physical book. I have it sitting there. I am planning still to pick up Brittany's memoir to read next, and as soon as I finish this clip and clean up this area, I'm gonna go read that one, but I haven't even started it yet. I think when I last updated, I had just started What the River Knows, and so I talked about it a little bit. And so I have been, obviously I've been reading way more on audio, and I think after I filmed that clip, I had struggled at a certain point with falling asleep and missing or dozing off, and not completely falling asleep, but missing certain pieces in the audio. And that combined with my thoughts that I expressed from the last video about how this narrator gives voice to the main character made me decide to switch and finish the book as a physical copy. I think part of it was I realized that I'd missed some key pieces and didn't understand some of how the plot was moving, and like who was who, and there was mysteries and reveals, and I realized that I had missed some of that parts. And so I did stay up a few extra minutes, I think it was on Thursday, to skim through those sections, because I remembered most of it, but I wanted to find those spots that I missed. And I really enjoyed reading through the book physically, even though for a lot of it I was skimming, but on the parts where I realized, oh, I missed this, I slowed down when I was reading. I'm like, okay, I really like the written form of this. I'm like, I am going to finish this physically. And so that's what I decided. So Friday, I picked up a different book, and I don't have a physical copy of that. That is The In-Between by Hadley Vlaus. At least I think that's how it's pronounced. This was something and this was one that I knew next to nothing about. I didn't read a synopsis. I didn't read a subtitle or anything. This is one of the books that is not a celebrity memoir. It is the story told by it is the story of a hospice nurse, younger than me. She's still fairly young, so it's not a life story. It's not a tell-all, but she's sharing lessons that she has learned through her time being a hospice nurse. So the one negative thing that I'll say about it is you can tell that it is not told by a trained voice actor or trained actor of any kind, because it is narrated by herself. There's just a certain cadence that most people have when reading things out loud that you can tell this is not what they do for a living. That was just a slight negative, but eventually I got into it. I still appreciate that though, because there's such a raw honesty when it's the person themselves telling this sort of a story. I told my mom, because we ran this morning, I was telling her some of the stories, and like, if you are a person that cries easily at books, maybe don't read this one, or read this one with a stack of tissue boxes with you, because I don't typically cry while reading books, but multiple times I teared up. And when I was telling her one of the stories from this book, I started tearing up. I've just briefly considered telling that story, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to, because just thinking about that story makes tears start to well up. There's not this idea, this compassion. She's telling the story of 12 different patients. She did get permission. I don't remember if she said if names were changed or not. They probably were, they might not have been. But she has permission to tell these stories. It's her life is woven through this. But she's telling the story and what she learns and how being with these people when they are dying and as they die, how that helped broaden and deepen her empathy, helped her learn how to be a more caring and compassionate person. There's one of the patients that she talks about was a homeless man living under a bridge. They talked about it. We have an unusual case, and it was really unusual. And she talks about some of the preconceived notions that she had when she was going down there, and how those people were very warm and opening, and they were very helpful. She saw them as human beings. And it's just, she also describes the process of changing her own mindset and how she looked at both the patient and the other people who were living in that area. And it just was a very heartwarming, deeply emotional story. And it's yet again another, you could say, win from the memoir category. Overall, the vast majority of books that I've read for the Goodreads Choice Awards that I have absolutely loved have come from the memoir category. There's a handful of standouts. Max of 3, maybe 4, from both the fantasy and the young adult fantasy combined. This is definitely a genre that I want to dig into more. That brings me back to What the River Knows. So I thought about it more. I'm getting to the point where on my audiobook holds, I am running out of available audiobooks to read, and it's getting down to the last few that there's super, super long wait lists on. And this is one that I had the audiobook for, and I used one of my Libro FM credits for, and I just was like, okay, I'll finish it up on audiobook. And I did. And it was fine, but I think that I got a reset. When I read some of it physically, it helped me understand and learn more about the characters and the interweaving of the perspectives. This is not my favorite. I did not latch onto this story nearly as much as I did Together We Burn, which is the other book that I've read by this author, but I did still enjoy it. Do I think that it belongs in the fantasy category? Potentially, by the way that Goodreads categorizes things. Sure. There's not a lot of fantasy in this particular book. There are hints, descriptions of magic, but the vast majority of this book is more historical fiction. I still love that. I love history. I love exploring and learning more about Egyptian history. They bring in Shakespeare because they're dealing with Cleopatra and his famous play, Antony and Cleopatra. There are definitely aspects of it that are fantastical, but very light on the fantasy. I have a feeling, however, that that's going to get amped up in the sequels. I don't know if there's one or more. I'm intrigued by the character of Wit. He is one of the main characters. He's the quote-unquote love interest. But there are so many secrets around him, and you don't find out any answers to that. And then it leaves on a cliffhanger, which I think is from Wit's perspective. So I'm intrigued. Is this high up on my list? No, this is definitely at least a 4-star, so I will be holding on to the book, but it's not high enough that I would seek out a special edition of the sequel if, let's see, which subscription did this? This was Goldsboro. So I don't know that Goldsboro would do the sequel to this, That's why I wasn't able to find it at first. I think another subscription did this, but I wouldn't eagerly anticipate or seek out and pay for the sequel special edition wise to this like I might another series. And then that brings me to the book that I am definitely going to finish tonight because I don't have much left. It is the last audiobook that I have. It is the second to last book of the adult fantasy category. The last one is Swordcatcher. I am not intentionally delaying on that. I just have no desire to read the super long books physically, and that's one of the long ones. And I've held off getting an audiobook copy of it with one of my credits, partially because I don't want to financially support Cassandra Clare. Complicated feelings there. And partially because it is shown, and partially because my library hold for the audiobook has shown that I'm really far up there in the list, as in soon to get it. It's been at the top of my hold list for quite a while, and it's been saying available soon for days because I'm first in line. I still don't have it. And so I'm desperately hoping that sometime in the next day or so, I get it off of my library hold, because I just have this inkling that, you know, Murphy's Law. I go and I'm like, okay, fine, I'm gonna go ahead and purchase an audiobook. As soon as I purchased it, I'd get a notification from my Libby app that it was available. I can't guarantee that, but you know, Murphy's Law might dictate that. That's future me's problem. I hopefully will get it at some time in the next couple days. I have physical or ebook copies of all but one of the remaining books, which are mostly memoir. I think, if I remember correctly, I have just one more of the young adult list, which is A Curse for True Love. I think that was one of the ones I was planning to read on Scribd/Everand before they were like, oh no, unlimited means 3. I'm gonna see if I can find a workaround for that, potentially, who knows. I have physical or ebook copies of all but one of them, which is The Witching Year by Diana Helmuth, which did not make the second round of the memoir. Let me talk about the one that I'm about to finish. And this one actually surprised me. And that is Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. The reason I'm getting to this one so late is because I knew I was getting a physical copy in my Illumicrate box, but I think because of the Thanksgiving holiday in the US, that bumped off shipping, and I didn't actually get my physical copy until December 2nd. And also I was way down on the list for the audiobooks. So I did actually use one of my Libro credits to purchase the audiobook to read this. This is not a book that I would have jumped at the chance to read. Even reading it, I am questioning why I'm enjoying it so much, because there are so many things in here that I'm like, these are not your buzzwords. Why are you enjoying this? But I'm enjoying it. It is well written. There are a lot of things in this book that lean towards horror, that skirt the edge of horror. As you may well know, if you've seen many, if not most of my videos, I don't do horror. That's not my genre. And so I'm like, okay. Also, of fantasy, urban fantasy is towards my least favorites. This is urban fantasy. Why a book that leans towards horror and is urban fantasy? Why am I enjoying this so much? I'm not really sure. I am hooked into this story by two things, I think. One, the narrator is fantastic. And two, the writing has hooked me in and has not let me go. The way that the story is crafted, she has created this very believable Appalachian setting. Now, I am from near Appalachia, not quite Appalachia, in the foothills of Appalachia. So I know and am familiar with a lot of things talked about and discussed. It rings true. It rings really true because, I mean, all you have to do is drive for like half an hour, 45 minutes north of where I live, and you are starting to get into those rural, poor, white, predominantly, ethnicity areas that get towards, and if you drive like an hour and a half, you're up in Asheville, North Carolina, starting to get into the heart of Appalachia. And so I do have some familiarity with that. You've got an almost sentient house, but not quite. You've got some complicated characters in here. I was thrown at first by the relationship that develops because I think I misunderstood the male love interest, at least like his age and specifically his age. Because there is a conversation between the main character Opal and the warden or the guardian or the starling that lives in Starling House. What that led me to believe that he's a fairly old man, very isolated, hermit type person holed up in this house. He's not. He's only a handful of years older than her. And at first, when I started reading this and remembered back to previous descriptions from other people talking briefly about the romance that's in this book, I'm like, I don't understand it because I think he's this creepy old man, but he's not. He's only a handful of years older than her. I think he's about 30, early 30s, and she's like 26. They're approximately the same age and have similar life experiences in that area. So that did throw me a little bit, but I think that was user error and not author error. The atmosphere is impeccable. I don't have enough good things to say about this book. This might be a sleeper hit for me. So I'm excited. I'm really excited to finish this. Tomorrow, I think my last update will be giving my final thoughts on Starling House, letting you know if Swordcatcher does end up coming in, and giving you my thoughts on the Brittany memoir, because I have a feeling that I could get it read. It depends on how much time I spend doing other things and how much time editing and sorting out my series spreadsheet goes, but hopefully I will be able to come back and update about 2 more books to close out this vlog. Okay, I am back to wrap up this vlog. Before I talk about the last 2 books that I finished, I want to briefly show the items that came in the last year of Sanderson box. It came yesterday. I've unboxed other of those boxes in my unboxing video, even when they weren't the ones that had the books in them. For this one, I'm like, I just want to open it. I wish I'd opened that one on camera. There were so many reactions to the different things in the box. So I think I have all of the items. They had 2 pins this time. They had the Cosmere character pin, which is Kelsier. When I read Mistborn, I did not picture Kelsier as a blonde. I know now that he canonically is blonde. And then the other one was a bonus pin that I absolutely love. It's Brandon himself. So cool. They're also socks. I have actually worn these. They are very comfortable. Not too warm, but also will keep your feet warm. They are the Dragonsteel logo here. And on the bottom of the feet, it has air on the side of awesome. So I've already tested those. Then this next item, I picked it up and I thought it was going to be a little notebook because this is what it is. Okay? You know, cool design to a notebook. It's an actual story. He gives us yet another story. This, I believe, he said is from his undergraduate time. So it definitely doesn't have all of the years of refinement, and it's a different style of story than he writes. But I just thought that was such a cool touch. And then, in a touch that makes me think yet another sign that I need to get back to writing, they gave us a notebook. And this notebook, the feel of it is phenomenal. It's fairly floppy. It'll open up pretty well. There are still stories to tell. It's got end page art. And it has a little letter from Sanderson. And every few pages or so it's got a little table of contents that you can put in there. But every few pages or so are little ideas from his own writing notebook that they put in there. This is one of my favorite items and is a sign that I need to get back to writing. Okay, so for a moment I forgot myself and was thinking I was doing an unboxing. I'm not doing an unboxing. I'm finishing my vlog. So I did, oh no, sorry. I had the dust jacket off of the book while I read, and the dust jacket got bent. Anyway, I finished Britney Spears' The Woman in Me, and I think it probably would have had a different impact for me if I hadn't known already so much of the book. Sometimes memoirs, when people go into and they give full spoiler discussions, I mean, spoiler as in it's this person's life, but there are reveals and things that the person may make in the memoir. So much of the most impactful things from this book have already been pulled out and used in all sorts of those celebrity news stories, which when I think about it, it's like all of the hardships that she faced brought on by the paparazzi. She was not the only one that mentioned this. Pamela Anderson mentioned it, Paris Hilton mentioned it and talked about it. But the idea that it almost feels like the book has been spoiled because of how they've taken the quotes and exploited them for even more news stories is kind of like, back off, people. So I also will say this book definitely reads like the person who it is the memoir of, which is much more simplistic than others. It has a different sort of reflection to it than books like, say, I'm trying to think of some of the other memoirs. I put most of them away, but like the Meg Kissinger one about mental illness, she definitely approached her memoir from a different point than Britney did. They had very different upbringing, education, etc. It feels weird to say this, but this felt almost too surface level. But a part of me wonders if that's where she's at this point, so recently out from under the conservatorship and not ready to analyze things at a deeply introspective level. But this is definitely going to be, like a memoir of a generation. Hers, Jeanette McCurdy's, they're coming from a very similar time frame of pop culture. Jeanette McCurdy's was a little bit later, but they are about the same age. So am I disappointed that I purchased a physical copy? No, it just was not the experience that I was expecting, but that's not the book's fault. Speaking of a book that did not provide the experience that I expected, we have Starling House. Now, I've taken the cover off because it's plastic and shiny. I gave a lot of detailed thoughts in my last update where I was probably about that much of the way through the book. I mean, this book stuck the landing. I felt completely wrapped up in the atmosphere the entire time. Although I will say, some of the ways that things ultimately were resolved with one of the antagonists, who was like a corporate shill, I forget what the term is, like a fixer sort of thing. That ultimate end doesn't feel like that part got wrapped up, tied off well enough, but everything else definitely did. And this is not a book that I ever would have picked up otherwise or thought I would have been interested in, but it's one of my favorite from the adult fantasy list this time around. Someone said that this book was mismarketed to be in fantasy. I don't think so. It's not a horror book. There's so many fantastical elements with the stories, with the Underland, with those creatures. You can have fantasy horror. This doesn't even get all the way to fantasy horror. If it did, I wouldn't like it. But it has those creepy elements to it that definitely make it an engaging, atmospheric read. I just am baffled and almost blindsided at how much I enjoyed this book. I'm glad that I got to end the week on a high note. And no, I still have not gotten the hold for Swordcatcher. I think what I'm going to try to do next is maybe do a month of Everand on my own, pay for a month of Everand on my own, because there are several on there that I'd love to get. Is it worth $11? I'm not sure. But the next one that I'm going to do is A Curse for True Love. If I don't end up restarting Everand, which I'll be able to do tomorrow, then I'll use one of my Libra credits for that one. But that'll be the next book. And physically, or on ebook, basically, I'm going to read The Man with Two Faces. I have that through Hoopla. As far as what comes next, I have 5 or 6 memoirs. I think maybe just 5. And then 1 each on young adult and adult fantasy. The books that I have left, aside from those 5 memoirs that I don't off the top of my head remember which ones they are, the 2 young adult fantasies that I have left are House of Marion and A Curse for True Love. Part of me wishes I could do A House for Marion first, because I know that I'm going to enjoy A Curse for True Love more than that. And I almost said that I have 2 left on the adult fantasy list. I don't. I have just 1 left on that list, and then I will have read every single book on that list. I didn't skip any this year, which that's big for me, and that's Swordcatcher, obviously. So maybe I'll get a hold of that tomorrow.